Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to AP Econ. We are Module 7. We're going to talk about market equilibrium and consumer and producer surplus. We'll just briefly touch on consumer and producer surplus because we'll talk about it later on, but we want to know a basic premise of it for some things that we'll talk about in price floors and price ceilings in Module 8. But we're going to talk about putting supply and demand together now. We're going to put the idea of the basic idea of, let me get the pen going here. We're going to get the idea of the demand curve, right? We're going to get the idea of the demand curve and the idea of the supply curve. And now we're going to marry the two and get what we call equilibrium. So we're going to put that together now. So we're going to build on this process. So today we're going to explain how supply and demand curves determine the market equilibrium and price. We're going to describe how prices move, the price moves the market back to equilibrium. We'll talk about shortages and surpluses. We'll talk about the equilibrium price and quantity when one of the curves shifts, supply or demand. And then the more difficult one is when they both shift. Now, I'll make another video of just practicing shifts, but I already have some other practice ones put on the website. So take a look at those, but we want to make sure that we get plenty of practice. And then I'm also going to do one on some practice FRQs of this topic. So what is equilibrium? When we're talking about a perfectly competitive market with supply and demand, we're saying at the point where demand equals supply. This is a voluntary exchange. We have a downward sloping demand curve, and then we have an upward sloping supply curve. And essentially, we are going to get what they call equilibrium. It's essentially where the price and quantity are determined. Now, remember, the demand curve is made by consumers, the supply curve is made by producers. So it's two independent behaviors that are then put together to come up with that market clearing price that, in theory, if a baker is making bread and he's at equilibrium at the end of the day, he should be out of all the bread. Okay, that's essentially the idea. So when we put this together, and we can see on the left here, we have the market demand schedule, and we can see as the price goes up with the quantity demand, it falls. And on the right here, we see the supply curve. As the market price goes up, the supply goes up. So we can see the law of supply being shown over here and the law of demand here on the left. So if we put the two together, we get what they call equilibrium. We're right there at equilibrium. At this equilibrium, we're at $3 and output of 30. $3 and output of 30. So this is the equilibrium price. This is the price that should be charged for a product. So when we think of the store and we go to the store and we go, Walmart or Jewel or someone, they're making the price. No, they should be at equilibrium price, because if the price is too high, then people aren't going to buy it and they'll end up with extra. If the price is too low, they'll run out of it. So we want to be at equilibrium all the time, all the time. So here is equilibrium at $3 and quantity 30. So what happens if the price is at $4? Well, if the price is at $4, we could see that the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied. And remember, if we slide up, a change in price means a change in quantity demanded, right? So as the price goes up, quantity demanded falls to 20. And we could see when price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up to 40. So what do we see happen? At the price of $4, we have a surplus at $4. How much is that surplus? That surplus is 20. We supply 40, we demand 20, we have a surplus of 20. Then what happens if the price is too low? If the price is too low, once again, we could see here on the demand schedule at $2, we demand 50. At $2, producers are willing to supply 20. What does that mean? That means that we have a shortage, right? The quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied at $2. Therefore, we have a shortage of 30 units. So what happens if the price is at $1? Well, at a dollar, we demand 80, the consumers demand 80, and the producers are willing to produce just 10. Therefore, we see that we have a surplus of 70, a surplus, or I'm sorry, a shortage of 70, a shortage of 70. So if we practice the basic idea of the free market, if the price is too high and we follow Adam Smith's laissez-faire economics, hands off, what should naturally happen? If the price is too high, it should naturally find its way down to equilibrium. And then the same idea, if the price is too low, we're going to see the price will naturally, the invisible hand will lift it up and take us back to equilibrium. This isn't a perfectly competitive market. In the free market, this happens, right? In a free market, the consumer and the producer are price takers. Let me say that again. In a free market, the consumers and the producers are price takers. They take the price that the market gives them. There's no price makers here. Now, in an oligopoly, in a monopoly, you'll see price makers and price takers. But here, both the consumers and the producers are price takers. So if we take a look here, and whenever I show you any of these samples, please make sure that you pause it, read the question, and make sure that you get it right. So if we take a look here, in the market shown in the graph above, at a price of $5, what will we see? We see the equilibriums at 4 and 10. What will happen at price of $5? Pause it. You should have gotten a surplus will happen, and the price, because of the invisible hand, will eventually fall. Now, today I'd like to also look at consumer and producer surplus. And the only reason I want to kind of introduce this to you is because later on we're going to be talking about in some other modules. We're going to be talking about price controls and price floors, price ceilings, and I just want you to have the basic idea of consumer and producer surplus. So remember, the market is about a voluntary transfer, voluntary exchange. So, went ahead. So, what if I was in the market to buy a truck? I want to buy a new truck for 20,000. I'm willing to spend 20,000, and a seller of a truck is willing to take no less than 15,000. And we negotiate a price, and we come up with $18,000. So, I'm willing to spend 20. The seller is willing to take 15, but we negotiate $18,000. What is my consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is our willingness and ability to buy a product. Let me say that again. Our willingness and ability to buy a product minus the actual price. So I'm willing to spend 20,000. I only had to pay 18, so my consumer surplus is $2,000. What am I going to do with that $2,000? I'm going to spend it somewhere else. I'm going to help stimulate the economy. I'm going to help raise the standard of living. Now, the producer surplus, well, they're willing and able to take 15,000, but they took 18,000. So producer surplus is calculated by taking the market price minus the willingness and ability to sell. So that would be 18,000 minus 15,000, which gives us 3,000. So essentially, that's like a $3,000 extra profit for the producer. And for me, the consumer, that's an extra $2,000 I can spend somewhere else. So together, there's $5,000 of additional money that could be used to raise the standard of living within society. Spend it somewhere else. So the consumer surplus, once again, is the difference between what you're willing to pay and what you actually pay, right? Consumer surplus is equal to the buyer's maximum minus the price. Producer surplus is the difference between the price that the seller receives and how much they're willing to take for it. Okay. So the producer surplus is the market price minus the seller's minimum that they're willing to take. So if we take a look at this one, the demand curve, the whole demand curve is the consumer's willingness and ability to buy a product. And the whole supply curve here is the willingness and ability of the producer to produce a product. Now we know the market price is $20 and at unit 30, $20 at unit 30. The consumer surplus is this top corner. Remember, the willingness and ability of the curve, right? The willingness and ability of the consumer to buy minus the market price. So we could calculate the area of this triangle. The producer surplus is the market price minus the supply curve, essentially. So we could say in this graph, we could say the demand curve up until equilibrium minus the actual price is the consumer surplus, right? And the producer surplus is the market price up until the supply curve, and then we subtract the supply curve. So the producer surplus is there. Now, once again, you have to be able to calculate the area of a triangle. Let me say that again, the area of a triangle. And if you don't know that, that's 1/2 base times height. Let me say that again. The area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So how would we calculate these things here? So at $20, what is the consumer surplus? Well, we go down this curve right here and calculate the area of this triangle, the area of this triangle. So 35 minus 20 is 15. 15 times the base, which is 30, times 1/2 gives us 225. And for the producer surplus, it would be the area of this triangle. So we could say the height is $20 minus 10. So the height is 10 right here. And the base, the length of it here is 30. So it would be 10 times 30 times 1/2 gives us 150. Therefore, our total surplus is $375. Now, what are we going to do with that $375? We're going to turn around and we're going to spend it on other things. Now, just to kind of point out something to you, what if the demand curve shifted to the right? What would happen to the total surplus? It would go up because our quantity is going to the right. Our standard of living is increasing. What if the supply curve shifted to the right? Once again, we see that triangle of total surplus going up. So once again, our standard of living is increasing. So anytime we see the demand or supply curve shifting to the right, we can assume that our total surplus is increasing. That means our standard of living is increasing. Now, if either one of these were to shift to the left, for example, I'll use another color here. Let's use the purple. So if the supply curve shifted to the left, now we would see we'd have this really small triangle here. So our total surplus fell. If we turned around and we said, let's see, let me use a different color. If the demand curve shifted to the left, once again, we see our total surplus would diminish. So anytime our demand curve or supply curve shift to the left, that essentially means our standard of living is falling. Now, I will tell you this, whenever our government tends to tax a product, whenever our government tends to tax a product, they create inefficiencies. These inefficiencies create dead weight, and dead weight is bad. Let me say that again. Dead weight is bad whenever they tax a good. We want efficiency. Remember, we talked about efficiency. Efficiency, if we go back to the original supply and demand curve, at this point, at equilibrium right here, that is the most efficient we can be. It's the most efficient. The free market is the most efficient economic market there is. We talked about in Unit 1 the idea of efficiency versus equity. Efficiency versus equity. Essentially saying if you want more equality, you have to give up efficiency. If you want more efficiency, you have to give up equality. So the question is, what would you prefer? Would you prefer efficiency or equality? And in capitalism, the free market, we prefer. This has shown to be the most successful economic system there is. Now, is there a sense of some equality within society? Absolutely. There are things that try to help and create equality in society. But once again, to create that equality, there's a trade off. You're going to give up some of that efficiency. So, once again, what happens though if only 10 units were produced? If only 10 units were produced, 10 units, we could see the consumer would be willing to pay $30 and their consumer surplus would just be this little tiny triangle up in the top. And the producer surplus would be way down here. That's it, right? Because they're paying way too much, right? If the only thing they're willing to accept too little, I should say. So if we see that the market is impeded and we're not at equilibrium, our total surplus would decrease and we get what we call dead weight. We will see this later, this idea of dead weight later. This is bad. This is inefficient. Bad. We don't like this, right? We don't like taxes. No one likes to pay taxes. No one likes to have their taxes raised on their paycheck. No business wants to pay more taxes. No one wants to see the taxes raised on buying goods. But we understand there has to be a certain amount of taxes, certain amount of things put in place. But anytime we get equilibrium shifting to the left and our quantity diminishing, that's not leading to growth. Okay. And that's not good. We want the demand and supply curve to always shift to the right to show economic growth. So let us review here. If we take a look at here and we calculate consumer and producer surplus, consumer and producer and total surplus. Once again, if we do the math here, there is consumer surplus, right? Our willingness, ability to buy minus the market price. So 22 minus 18, right? Which is 4. 4 times 20 is 80 times 1/2, right? That's consumer surplus. There's our producer surplus. So consumer surplus is 40, right? 22 minus 18 is 4. 4 times 80, or 4 times 20 is 80. 1/2 of 80 is 40. Producer surplus is 18 minus 16, which is 2. 2 times 20 is 40. 1/2 of 40 is 20. And what is our total surplus then? Is 60. When total surplus continues to grow, that's a fantastic thing for our standard of living. So let's take a look. Let's continue to build upon that. Okay. So by now we should know about the law of supply. Prices go up, quantity demand goes down, and in the inverse of that, law of supply says price goes up, quantity supply goes up. We should know about, I should say, are we talking about 6 shifters? I thought I changed it. 6 shifters of demand, CSI PET, right? We did CSI PET. And when we talked about supply, we talked about GI toes, right? We should know what a subsidy is. We talked about that. We should be able to explain that price doesn't shift the curve. The determinants, these two determinants shift the curve. When there's price changes, those are slides along the curve. We should know what equilibrium is, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. Okay, we should know those things. We should know what a shortage or a surplus is. We should know those basic ideas. So, once again, when we put equilibrium together, okay, we have to now start to see what happens when there's shift changes. What happens when there's shift changes? So you always have to look what is shifting. We have to find out, label the graph, put our supply and demand curve in there, label them, put the price, the quantity, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. We need to label all those things, and we have to see what is demand, what is a shift in supply or demand doing, right? What is the determinants? Is it a CSI PET? Is it a GI toes? What is happening? What's happening? Is there an increase in price, a decrease in price, an increase in quantity, a decrease in quantity? What's happening? What is the new equilibrium? So we have to put all these things together. So let's go ahead and practice. Okay. So these that we're going to practice are only having only one shift. Either supply is shifting or either demand is shifting. But none of these examples right here that we're going to do right now have both shifting. That's when we get a little tougher. And I'm going to make a video. I have some videos with double changes, but I'm going to make some more. I want you guys to feel very confident in what you're doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at hamburgers once again, and we're going to look with 6 different examples. I'm sorry, 5 different examples. So these are our 5 examples, and we're going to see what happens to price and quantity after the shifts. So let's take a look at the first example when we think about hamburgers. So a new grilling technology cuts production time in half. production time. That sounds like supply. So it cuts the production time in half. So what will happen? Well, that will increase supply. So that'll shift right in the supply curve. Now, if we look here, we could see that the price fell and the quantity went up, our new equilibrium. We also see that this what's happening here, we see the curve an increase in supply and an increase in quantity demanded. How do I know it's increase in quantity demanded? Because we slid down the demand curve to the right and we increased the quantity, right? Price fell, quantity demand went up. So if I were to ask you what's happening in this curve, you would say because of an increase in technology and cutting the production time in half, the producer can now make more hamburgers. Therefore, the supply increased and the quantity demanded increased. That caused the market price to fall and market equilibrium to increase. What about the price of chicken sandwiches? A substitute increases. CSI Pet, GI Toast. CSI Pet, complimentary sub. Oh, it's a substitutable good, right? Substitutable. So if the price of chicken sandwiches increases, that means if the price of chicken sandwiches increase, less people are going to buy chicken sandwiches. So what are they going to buy instead? Boom! They're going to buy more of the hamburgers. So this shows us an increase in demand and an increase in quantity supplied. We slid up and to the right on the supply curve. We saw an increase in price and we see an increase in quantity. Have you noticed the previous page showed an increase in supply, then an increase in quantity demanded? Now this one shows an increase in demand and an increase in quantity supplied. And there's only one shift. So they're both increasing or decreasing because you'll see an increase in one of the shifts and an increase in the quantity supply or demand of the other when there's only one shift. Here's another one. Price of hamburgers falls from $3 to $2. Is that a CSI Pet or a GI Toes? It's neither because it's a change in price. So what's happening? Well, the price fell. So if we remember the law of demand, when the price falls, quantity demand it falls. Ooh, all right, whoa, quantity demand it goes up. When price falls, quantity supplied falls. Oh, I almost made an error there. So if we look, the quantity demanded goes to here, and the quantity supplied slides down to here. So what do we see happening here? We see a shortage. This would be like if there's a sale, a Black Friday, Christmas sales, right? This is why stores run out of stuff. They put a price well below the market price. Let's look at number 4. The price of ground beef triples. What is ground beef? What is ground beef? Ground beef to a hamburger. That sounds like an input. So when we think of GI Toes, that's an input cost. We said that those have an inverse relationship. A rise of an increase in input cost lead to a decrease in supply. So there we go. We get a decrease in supply. So it's a shift left in supply. So a decrease in supply and we get a decrease in quantity demanded. Remember, we slid along the demand curve. Here we see the price go up and the quantity fall. Let's take a look at the next one. Human fingers found in multiple burger restaurants. Woo! Are you going to want to go out and buy a hamburger if your fingers are being found in burgers? Probably not. I bet you that would fall under demand, under taste, fads, and preferences. So I bet you that'd be a decrease in demand. And there it is, a decrease in demand and a decrease in quantity supplied. We slid down the supply curve. We see that decrease in price and that decrease in equilibrium quantity. Okay. Now, once again, there's a bunch of samples in your booklet, but you need to practice, 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 practice. Now, this is where it gets tricky. This is where it gets tricky. The old double shift. The old double shift. Now, suppose that demand for milk increased at the same time as production technology improved at the same time. So that would be an increase in demand and an increase in supply. Okay. So if we were to do that, well, what happens to price? What happens to quantity? And this is where it gets really tricky. The double shift. If two curves shift at the same time, either price or quantity will be an indeterminate or ambiguous, like that emoji with your hands up and you're going shrugging your shoulders. Something will be ambiguous when there are two shifts, whether price will be ambiguous or quantity will be ambiguous. Okay. So before I show you, I'm going to show you a couple things here. Okay. So I could do this. Watch. I could. Oh, that wasn't good. So I'm going to show you a couple different things here. Okay, and I'll use a different color here. What happens if there's a huge increase in demand, but a really small increase in supply? This one shows us what price goes up, quantity goes up. But now I'm going to show a really big shift in supply, but a really small shift in demand, and that's a kind of a crappy one. But we would see price fell and quantity went up. Or if I shift them both the same amount, then we would see price would stay the same and quantity would still go up. Now, what do we see in all of these? Quantity increases, but price, one of them showed it increasing, one of them showed decreasing, one of them showed no change. So that's really where we start to get into the trickiness. Okay, so if we have an increase in demand here and we have an increase in supply, we know quantity is increasing, but price is going to be an indeterminate. It's going to be ambiguous. Now, there's another way that we could practice this. Okay, I like to draw them separately. Even though they're on one chart. I do like to draw them separately. So we're going to draw it out separately and then combine our results. So if we look at this one here, if we increase supply, like we said in the previous chart, and we increase demand. So I'm drawing them separately so that I can get a clearer picture. We could see on the top here, the price is falling. When you increase supply, our price falls, right? We see the price falls right here and quantity goes up. And we see that right here. Over here, we see price went up and quantity still increased here, right? So if we put those together, what do we see common? Well, here price increased, here price decreased. But what do we see happening in both when we put them together? When we put them together, we see that price is ambiguous and quantity is going to increase. So when we have two things shifting, we will always have something that's ambiguous. And I'm going to go through a bunch of examples on another video for you. So let's try another one here. What if supply increases and demand falls? So let's say we're talking about hamburgers again. Let's say we're talking about hamburgers. And I said something like, the beef prices of beef fell. Well, if the prices of beef fell, then there would be a shift right in supply. But then, what if I said that the the CDC said that beef is bad for you and makes you go bald? Well, that would be a shift left in demand, right? So we don't know what's truly happening here. So if we do it separately, if we show up here, here's that increase in supply. Once again, that increase in supply means a decrease in price, an increase in quantity here. If we have that decrease in demand, demand falls, we see a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity. So once again, we see price decreases here, price decreases here. But here we see quantity decreases, but quantity increases. So if we turn around and look, what's the same, what's different? We see that price is the same, but quantity is different. Okay, so if we piece those two together, we see that price decreases and quantity is ambiguous or an indeterminate. I like saying ambiguous. Now, I will say there are exceptions. If they tell you that the demand curve, and they're using the same numbers to figure this out, if the demand curve shifted left by 5%, and the supply curve shifted right by 15%. If they give you numbers to qualify or quantify the amount, the actual amount of shifting, then nothing would be ambiguous. But that's only if they give you exact numbers of the shifts, the percentage shifts, or the amount that it will shift. Only if they give you the exact numbers can you do that. So what happens if supply decreases? So that's a shift left in supply, and demand falls, which is a shift left. Well, they're both shifting left. They're both shifting left. I'm willing to bet if they're both shifting left, then we probably will. I'm going to make a guess here that quantity is going to fall and price is ambiguous. Just as I would think if they both are increasing and shifting to the right, quantity would increase and price would be ambiguous. But let's check it out. So here, what if supply decreases? So here we go again. If we look, supply shifts to the left. It's an increase in price, right? An increase in price and a decrease in quantity because it's going to the left. And then here we said that demand decreases. So that's a decrease in price, right? Decrease in price. And the quantity is decreasing here. So what do we look? What's the same? Oh, look at quantity is the same in both of them. So we know if this is the scenario, what do we know? Quantity is going to decrease and price is ambiguous. We can't figure it out. Okay. So, once again, this idea of double shifts. Okay. So, here's a simple little graph. When supply increases and demand increases, then we know prices is ambiguous and quantity will go up. If demand increases and supply decreases, we know the price will go up and quantity is ambiguous. So this is just a little matrix chart. If demand decreases and supply increases, we know the price will go down and quantity will be ambiguous. And if they both decrease, if supply decreases, demand decreases, we know that quantity will go down and price is ambiguous. So this is just a little chart for you to try to remember what will happen if you have two simultaneous shifts. You have a shift in the supply and a shift in the demand curve at the same time. Okay, so let's take a look at some more examples. So if we review, once again, we should know about the law of demand, law of supply, the differences in a change in demand and change in quantity demanded, difference between change in supply and change in quantity supply, what happens to the price above equilibrium, what happens to the price below. We should understand the double shifting rules, right? We should be able to know what consumer producer surplus and total surplus are. Okay. So let's take a look at this one. Pause it and try to figure it out here. All right, I'll read it and then you pause it. In a perfectly competitive market, which is what we're talking about, which of the following shifts in supply and demand curves will definitely cause both equilibrium price and quantity to decrease? Okay. Now, look, it said both of them will do the price and quantity to decrease. So then obviously nothing's ambiguous. So it must mean if nothing's ambiguous, that must mean that it's only one thing shifting. Pause it, take a look. All right, you should have got E. You should have got E. So it says we could graph that. If we turned around and we graphed it, all right, demand, because it didn't say anything was ambiguous, right? That both the price will fall and the quantity will fall, right? So if we kind of look at it, the only way the price will have to fall and quantity will have to fall, the only thing that will cause that would be a shift left in demand, right? Whenever you actually know there's a decrease in price, a decrease in quantity, or an increase in price and a decrease in quantity, or vice versa, or a decrease in price but an increase in quantity, that means that only one thing is shifting. So in this example, we see a decrease in demand and a decrease in quantity supplied, and it's only one thing shifting. The next one says here the graph above, which is actually below, my bad. The graph below shows the market demand for good X. A movement from point A to B would most likely be caused by, and the answer is D, a decrease in the production costs for good X. Well, how do we know that? Well, if we were at this price here, what's that? A decrease in the production costs would mean an increase in supply, and take us to here. Boom, right there. So this would be supply and supply. So supply and supply prime. Okay. Let's look at another example from an AP exam. If 1/4 of our nation's wheat crop is destroyed by a flood in a given season, all right, listen to 1/4 of our nation's wheat crop is destroyed by a flood in a given season, then the price of wheat and the quantity sold will change in the short run in which of the following ways? What will happen? What will happen? Pause it. The answer should be C. All right. Price will increase and the quantity sold will decrease. How do I know this? On the test, you're going to draw everything out. So here's a demand, here's our supply, here's price, here's quantity, and it says that there's a flood and part of the crops are destroyed. So what's going to happen? The supply curve is going to shift this way, right? And what happened? The price went up and the quantity fell. Boom. Next, which of the following will occur in a competitive market, which is supply and demand, when the price of a good is less than its equilibrium price? Price of a good is less than its equilibrium price. So we're here and we said the price is less than the equilibrium price. What's going to happen? Boom, the price will increase to eliminate the shortage and restore equilibrium. The price is too low. It's creating this. If the price is too low, it's creating this shortage of goods, and because of the invisible hand and its free market, it will go back up. So the next one, which of the following changes in the supply of and demand for a good will definitely result in a decrease in both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? I think we might have seen this. Both are decrease in the price and quantity. Boom, that's C. There's no change in supply, but there's a decrease in demand. So once again, they didn't say anything about anything being ambiguous. So we know that only one thing is shifting. So that would be this, a decrease in equilibrium price, a decrease in quantity. So let's review it one more time here, just so that we're clear. Here is equilibrium, equilibrium, supply and demand, equilibrium, right? And if we have equilibrium, this is a good thing, right? Equilibrium, we're efficient. We're efficient. But what happens when we have a surplus? If the price is too high, we get a surplus. We're not efficient. We have a surplus. The quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demand. Invisible hand will push it back down to equilibrium. Okay? Come on. What happens if the price is too low? If it's below equilibrium, we have a shortage. Quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. The invisible hand will lift it back up to equilibrium where we're efficient. Okay? So think about a price of admission. The competitive market model determines the prices you pay for a ticket. I mean, think of you guys pay really high prices. Now, granted, there's all these surcharges that Ticketmaster and places put on, but the demand and supply. If you're thinking of a concert venue, if they only have 20,000 seats, we know if there's a concert and there's only 20,000 seats, then this is 20,000 right here, right? That's a supply curve. It's straight up and down. That's going to be a straight up and down supply curve because they can't all of a sudden overnight fill more seats. But if they're not very popular, the band's not very popular, the demand, and not many people want to go to it, the demand will be really low. But as there are better and better band, the demand keeps shifting to the right. And what happens? The market price keeps going up and up and up. So once again, if we show a shift in demand, if we show a shift in demand, once again, an increase in demand shifts us to the right, and it's a slide along the supply curve. So this is an increase in demand and an increase in quantity supplied, and we see the price goes up, right? If we're at equilibrium again here and we get a shift left in supply, what do we see? We see an increase in price, a decrease in quantity, and we see a slide up and to the left on the demand curve. So this is a decrease in supply and a decrease in quantity demanded. Now, what happens? Whoops. So two opposing forces determine the equilibrium, right? So here we are. Now, what if we have an increase in demand dominates the decrease in supply? So if we have a huge increase in demand, but a really small decrease in supply, well, look what happens. We see the price will go up compared to the original equilibrium, but the quantity, look where the quantity is, right? So we see an increase in price and an increase in quantity. But once again, this is one of those things where we already said that we're giving you this information. But if they don't give you this idea of a dominant demand shift or a small supply shift, they don't give you numbers. We always know that something is going to be ambiguous. Okay. So once again, here we have a large decrease in supply, a small decrease in demand, a small increase in demand. Once again, here in this case, we know that the price goes up and the quantity falls, but we're telling you how much they're shifting. We said a large decrease in supply and a small increase in demand. But when we don't give you those large or small things or percentages, we know something will be ambiguous. Okay. A decrease in the supply of bacon may cause consumers to squeal, right? But it won't cause a lasting shortage because higher bacon prices will decrease the quantity demanded and increase the quantity supplied. So we have to understand that the market prices are always changing. All right. Now, think about this basic idea right here. What do you think happens for the demand for turkeys around Thanksgiving? I bet you the demand curve shifts to the right. What do you think happened to the supply of turkeys around Thanksgiving? Well, don't you think producers probably set up the idea that they're going to produce more turkeys for Thanksgiving? They probably months in advance are producing more turkeys for that turkey season, right? So once again, I have an article that goes with this, but once again, you have to make these decisions every day in your life of what you're going to do. I also have a good video. It's posted on our website to take a look at. It's called "It's a Wonderful Loaf," and read the poem is pretty interesting. But at the end of the day, we should know what equilibrium price is. We should be able to calculate shortages and surpluses. We should be able to calculate shortages and surpluses. We should be able to tell what happens to the price with a shift in demand. We should see what happens to the price of in quantity of a shift in supply. And we should also know about the double shift. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to try to create some more videos for you with some more practices that you could pause and take a gander at it, and I'll walk you through them. Until next time, have a great day.